Welcome, everybody. It's an exciting time to be here on the Sunday evenings when we can get together around the world and have marvelous speakers. This evening we have Ann Harrison, and Wendy knows quite a bit more about Ann than I do, so I'm going to let Wendy do the introductions, but what I wanted to do is welcome everybody, and this is going to be a wonderful evening. Go ahead, Wendy.
I've been hoping to get Ann Harrison to come and talk to us for a long time, and it's worth the waiting for. Ann has had a long history. Her husband, Tom Harrison, was an absolute icon in the spiritualist movement. His mother, Minnie Harrison, was doing home circles way back, and Ann will tell you all about that. But Ann herself has a long history in physical mediumship, and also in publishing books about physical mediums. So Ann, I'm looking forward very much to your talk and to having you as part of our circle.
Hello everybody. It has taken me quite a while. It's just getting things sorted out. It's having moved countries a year ago. It's taken a while to get settled down. But as Spirit told me that they had work for me to do and they needed me back in England, so here I am and ready to go. So this evening, well, where do I start? There's so many knowledgeable people out there that I'm sure know more than I do, but yes, I have had a few years with physical mediumship, like 25 in fact, so not that long. But it does go, because that was when I met Tom, just about 25 years ago. Before that, I knew nothing at all about it. I was not a natural medium. I had one or two psychic experiences. And but when my first husband died, that's what set it off. He came back after 3 weeks with a message for his sister to a friend of hers, telling her, couldn't believe how good it was that the pain had gone. He'd had a very painful cancer. And my reaction was, when can I come? And that just started the whole path. The journey just has been absolutely amazing. And as I say, that was in 1990. And after that, in 93, somebody persuaded me. I was very reluctant. Persuaded me to go to a talk by Tom Harrison about the amazing physical mediumship of his mother. And I said, but nobody does physical mediumship nowadays. That's an old hat. That's what I'd been told by the president of our church. And I gave in, because she said, well, if we go and stay at this centre for the weekend, it helps them raise funds. And it'll be a bit of fun as well. So we did. And I was absolutely blown away by the things that Tom told us that weekend when he did his talk. And Wendy, I know on the newsletter this week, you've put Tom's video of him speaking about visits by our friends, visitors from the other side. And the best parts of that, of him talking about it, were just amazing to me. You can imagine somebody who knew nothing at all about it, him that, really? Could that really happen? And of course, the history of Tom's circle goes right back till the end of the Second World War, when Tom came back from the army. He went round to their friends on a Saturday evening, and after about 3 weeks of visiting, just social visits, Sydney, whose house it was, said, why don't we have a circle? Because they were all spiritualists or lyceumists. And Tom's mum was already a trance medium. And so they started to sit. And the first week, can you believe it? She was already a developed trance medium. And they thought that they would just get trance. But that first night, they put all the letters around in a circle around the table, the glass, and started to hold the glass and wait for it to move, while it was whizzed round and round and round in circles and shot off the table. and Min went into trance. And straight away, her sister's guide came through. Her sister Agnes, Aunt Ag, Mrs. Agnes Abbott, who had been a medium in London, a professional medium at what is now the SAGB. It was the MSA at those days. They came through and said, sit with the trumpet and you will get as good results as Mrs. Abbott. But they couldn't believe it because she was a good trumpet medium in her own home circle. And for those of you who don't know what a trumpet looks like, here it is. I don't know if you can see it. I'm a bit too near to the, where are we? There we are. The original 1930s aluminium trumpet that was given to Tom by his aunt's daughter so they could use it in the circle, and it was used all those times. And the main thing, of course, with a trumpet is to amplify the voices. It's not to have it dancing all over the room and hitting the ceiling, but they do that as a bit of fun to get us all excited. But main thing is that a quiet voice coming from the voice box of the medium or from an external voice box can be amplified right in front of a sitter without using too much energy, because the amount of energy that it takes for a spirit person to speak is huge, and it uses up very, very quickly. But if they can speak more quietly, and they'll often say, we hear a whisper, and they'll say, but I'm shouting at the top of my voice. It's the concentration that's needed. But that is what it was. And they would put that open end, where's my camera? There it is. That would go up against somebody's ear or right in front of their face so that they could hear the voice. And so they started to sit with trumpets and very, very quickly got results. They used them to tap people, to make signs. What they would do sometimes, they would do it by putting up and down. That would be one, so that would show that, I think it was Aunt Ag went up and down with the trumpet to show before they got the voice that spirit person was there. Another one would go round and round in a circle. Sunrise, the guide, would go round and round in a circle. And one night, somebody said, he always goes the same way. It stopped and went back the other way. And ever after that, when sunrise comes through with the trumpets in the motion, it goes both ways. And you can say, hello, sunrise, it's good to have you here. And he still does, because he's been through at Stuart Alexander's circle. He came through at David Thompson's circle when we had him in Spain. And in actual fact, that night, he came and stood in front of me. And I skipped a long way ahead, but to feel that energy of a spirit guide standing in front of you. He must have been about 7 feet tall. It was such a huge energy. And he spoke to me, and he always calls me his little sister. So that is something very, very special, because there's almost an unbroken line of him working through Minnie, being her doorkeeper, working with her, speaking, introducing communicators. And then when she passed, Tom found that he was often with him. And he worked with him a lot. He would know when he was around, he would feel that there. When we started to sit in other circles, particularly with Stuart, sunrise would make his presence known. And in our other circle, home circle, he was there. And since Tom passed, he's been to me and spoken through the trumpet at Stuart Alexander's, saying, just 1 week after Tom had passed, we were due at the Cobra Hills seminar for Tom to do his talk when he unfortunately had a fall and died. And so that following Saturday, when it was the seance, the trumpet was up and moving. and came and was right in front of me. As I was sitting back on the second row, it was right there, turned in circles both ways, and said, "Sunrise, greet little sister. All send love. All is well." What a wonderful message to get. Just that, such a short time. And the following week, Tom himself came through and spoke to me at a trance circle in Norfolk. Since after that, there was no stopping him, but I've jumped a long way. But if you want to know about Tom's Mum's Circle and more about it and the wonderful things, there's Tom's book, and I'm going to try and show you. See if we can do this properly. That's it.
Yep.
That's Tom's book about his mother's mediumship, but also about his life and his mother's life, and our sittings with Stuart Alexander and our own home circle as well. So it's her lifetime's experiences as well as the home circle. And that lady, of course, as people say, look, wrapped in a shroud, that was his Antag. She materialized and stood there for her own son to take that photograph. Imagine what that must feel like. 6 years after his mother had died, his son's taking the photograph of her standing in a fully materialized spirit. She could stand for several minutes, just absolutely still, while photographs were taken. There's movement on the side here. The gentleman sitting on the edge of the cover, that's Tom's dad, Tosha. And behind you can see the black curtain where Min was sitting in a chair in what was their cabinet, which was a simpler piece of black curtaining hung across the corner. Very similar. To start with, they had materialization in just sitting in a circle, in red lights, but just sitting around the fireplace. And they, after 6 weeks or so, they'd had several people a night coming through, building right there in red light in front of them. And they said, "If you will have a cabinet," he said, "Well, why do we can build better?" And Tom's always said, "Oh, what's wrong with this? And we think you're doing very well." He said, yes, but more people could come and they could stay longer. We can keep the energy condensed. So they did. Piece of wood with a piece of blackout curtaining attached to it, and that was their cabinet for all the rest of the time. So wonderful, wonderful time. So do please either listen to the video, or if you want to, you can actually buy a copy from me. I'll say that now. I've got visitors from the other side. That's the DVD that we have. So it is out on YouTube that you can watch it, and you can hear Tom himself telling the stories. But when I met Tom, the main thing was that I persuaded him to go to the Arthur Findlay College, where he'd been the first manager when the college opened in the 60s. He was the first manager. And I persuaded him, because I was going to go on a week, experimental week it was called. And I said, "Why don't you come as well? And then maybe you could do your talk." Well, he did. And he got so many invitations after that week that I said, "Well, I'll do the driving, and then you can do the talk." And that's how the whole thing started. And for 7 years, we just never stopped traveling. And we finally got married in 1998. So just 20 years ago. But being with Tom opened doors for me to be able to sit as well, because he'd made great friends with Stuart Alexander through the Noah's Ark Society. And Stuart had invited him to go and sit in the home circle whenever he was in the north of England, because Tom at that stage was living down in south, not too far from London. And so on one of the trips coming north in the early in 1994, Tom got permission for me to go along as well, and to meet and to have my first experience of a proper home circle. Just the members of the circle, Stuart and his brother, Ray and June, whose home we sat in, Stuart's sister, Gaynor, and a couple of other ladies who'd sat with him regularly. And that first night, I remember the guide Whitefeather saying, "Welcome, little sister. We know a lot about you." That's quite something for somebody who was very new to it. But that same evening, my father came and spoke through the trumpets, just very, very briefly. And following him, my husband, Norman, he came as well. Very difficult to understand because it was their first time ever, but trying to make it sounds through the trumpet, because the sound resonates very often within the metal trumpet, so it's not always clear. But he said something to me which nobody could know about, and it was, "How are the trees?" Norman and I love gardening, and we had a lot of apple trees, pear trees, a plum tree, a damson, and I'd neglected them. In the 3 years that he'd gone, I hadn't managed to keep the garden up to scratch. I did try, but those trees really did need pruning. And so that was his comment. How are they? They knew what was going on. And it was a wonderful evening. But two of the most amazing evenings I had there were when 1997, it was a night that I just couldn't, you can't forget. It was in the April. And Walter Stinson asked me, Stuart's one of his main communicators, asked me to go and sit beside Stuart and to hold Stuart's right hand. Now, Stuart's fastened into his chair. In those days, he used to fashion with ropes around his body and around his legs. But his arms were fastened to the chair, to the arms of the chair, with very strong cable ties, quite thick ones, which took a lot of power to cut them with the wire cutters at the end. He had to push really hard to break them. This breaking strength, I think, was several tons. When they said about it, when I put my left hand into Stuart's hand, I could feel the bones of his hand very strong, and it grasped my hand very tightly. And Walter said, "Anne, I want you to feel with your right hand Stuart's wrist, feel up his arm." So I moved my right hand across over my left onto Stuart's arm to feel that the plastic tie was really tightly in place. It was. Could pull it. No way could you move it, and you certainly couldn't get it off because the arm was continuous with the seat to the back, so there was no way it could slide off. The next thing you know, he said, "Right, put your hand back in Tom's." So Tom was sitting to the other side of me, so I put my right hand back in his. And the next thing I know is Stuart's arm started to vibrate very, very, very quickly, up and down, up and down. And then suddenly our arms shot up in the air, free. And Walter said, "Anne, feel the arm of the chair." So with my right hand, I felt across, and there on the chair was the band. It was still in place and still solid. He said, "Now give it a tug really hard." So he pulled it and pulled. No way could it come off. It was absolutely solid. He said, "Right, put your hand back." So I put my right hand back in Tom's, and our arms came down and rested on the chair. And he said, feel Stuart's wrist. So I put my hand across, and no, there was no strap across it. Our arms were resting on the chair, but there was no strap on it. He said, move your hand away. So I moved my right hand away, and I heard a little noise. And he said, check again. I checked again, and the band was back in place around Stuart's arm. There wasn't another loose one. Well, there were some loose ones on the table, but nowhere could anybody else reach it at that stage. So that was a new, same band had gone back round. Within seconds, the arms were free again, and our arms were up in the air. When it came, still keeping our arms up in the air, he said, now feel the arm of the chair. And the band had completely disappeared. The band was not on the chair arm. He said, make sure, check again. I checked again. He said, our arms came down, we rested, it rested there. And the next thing I knew was a large hand was placed on top of mine. My left hand is still holding on to Stuart. I've never let go. A large hand is placed on the top of mine, on the top of my left hand. And under it was a plastic cable tie, just there as a circle. I could feel the whole of it around it. And the next thing, the moment, it was around my wrist and through it. I'm not imagining it. I can still feel that sensation of that band passing through my arm, through my wrist, as I was still hanging on to Stuart. We'd never broken contact. I was quite something. How it was done, I have no idea, because they say they have to get the medium into a very sensitive state for that to happen. But they did it, and I know what it felt like. I've heard of people when they were at school talking of seeing and feeling lights moving inside their bodies and inside their arms. David Fontana was one, Professor David Fontana. He described how this light went inside him. Another friend of mine in West Yorkshire, he had the same. They went to sit with Robin and the circle and could feel and he could see this blue light traveling inside of him. So to them, we are not solid. We're solid to ourselves because of the vibration we're at. But they can make it not solid. Just how, I don't know. But it was a most amazing thing. Walter had said to me before he started, Anne, remember to whatever happens tonight. Remember everything. It is very important. And I can only think it's because I can talk. I have the opportunity to speak to people, to tell them of these things, to tell them of what Spirit can do, that they did these things for me. The end of that story was that he then gave me that strap as a souvenir, and I still have it. Anybody can have a black cable tie and fasten it, but I know that one was special. They then took a fresh one from the tabletop and manipulated it through, and I could feel it passing against the sleeve and against my wrist, and I'm still holding on to Stuart as they put the two ends together, and I could hear it zip up as they fastened it. And then he said, right, leave go of Stuart's hands and go back to your seat. And I went back to where I was normally sitting, and June then took up her place against Stuart, which was where she always sat, June Lister. An unbelievable, an amazing, amazing night. But what they can do and the different things that they can do, and they love doing, because it isn't just about, as we said, one of this matter through matter. is that they can make us not solid. They can make all sorts of objects not solid. They can completely unstrap a medium and stand them up and walk around. They can do it. So it's very, very difficult if you're always sitting in total darkness to know whether it's spirits have done it or whether a medium's done it. This is why so many checks are needed when we're sitting, if we're sitting in the dark. To have something happen in the light and to see the ectoplasm is quite something as well, because ectoplasm can take on all sorts of forms. I mean, Tom has always said it can be made, it's made into skin, it's made into hair, it can be a beard, it can be clothes. But the reason why in Tom's circle, when you see any photographs, they're just in a long robe. They're not dressed in suits and ties and hats or dresses. Very, very seldom do you get that. Because when they do that, they use up all the energy that's available for the whole night. So instead of 7 or 8 people coming, maybe only 1 or 2 come. Because the actual use of energy and the moulding into clothes, it takes a lot of effort, and that just burns it up. If they keep it simple, but they make their faces recognizable, that is what's important. And this is what Tom said in his circle. They asked if they could have a red light once they started to get the ectoplasm. And they said, well, if you do, it has to be very dim. So they did have a red light, and they hung it from the ceiling. It was a small sitting room that they sat in. And when Aunt Hag built, the second week that she built, she put her hand out to Tom and took hold of his hand and said, "Son, Sonny," as she always called him, Tosha, Tom's dad across the other side of the circle, holding out her hands. They took hold of it and she drew them to her, and she put her face up to the light and said, "Can you see me? Do you recognize me?" That was what's so important. She'd been in the spirit world 6 years. And it was important that the features were still recognizable. Now, I read somewhere the other day about them having to remember what they looked like. And they sometimes have people who help them to remember. And I can't remember now where it was that I was reading it, but somebody had said that he came through, but he was the one who helped them to remember what they looked like as they were forming a face. Transfiguration is the same. They need to be able to form that face so that you can recognize them. There has to be no doubt that that is something. So it's we think that when you've got the scientists and they say, oh, it's this and it's this and it's this, everything's easy. When you get over there, it isn't. Even Tom had to admit that it was much more difficult than he thought. Even speaking through a trance medium was very difficult. He needed help to start with. And his efforts trying just to form the words through somebody else's, speaking through a trance medium, trying to form the words through somebody else's voice box. So he had an awful job. The sitters were trying to guess what he was trying to say, and he got very frustrated because he said, "Oh, he was trying to say, it's me," and they were guessing it was all sorts of things. And he thought that they would recognize him straight away, but they did eventually work out who it was. That was at Stuart Alexander's circle. But we're saying about in ectoplasm, making the face recognizable, so it doesn't matter about the rest of the body. But if they just occasionally they would form other bits. We've got the wonderful photographs that of Silver Bell. There are 1, 2 others, the very old ones that were taken of Katie King with crooks. I mean, they're just having that one person. But in Tom's little home circle, they said it's not a scientific circle. It's not for testing. It's not to have all these business, fastening the medium up or anything. It is a social get-together of friends and family. And our friends can help other friends. But it is not to be shown off. It's just to be kept as a social gathering. And over 200 visitors, friends of friends, people known to them, did go and were invited and met up with their friends. One man happened, he heard Tom speak to him, spoke to him about it, and he said, oh, I'd love to come. And Tom said, well, it's a 2-year waiting list, unfortunately. Well, 2 or 3 weeks later, there was somebody dropped out. And Sydney went to Tom and said, do you know of anybody who can come on Saturday night? He said, because he said, we've got a space. Tom said, well, I think Jack Graham could come. He's longing to come. He had a fish and chip shop in a nearby street, because Tom and his mum had a fish and chip shop. And Tom used to go and help Jack Graham at times as well. So he talked to him about it. So Jack came along to the circle and he was amazed. He met some of his family when they materialised, and just had a wonderful, wonderful evening. When he got home, he got his 3 teenage children out of bed and started telling them all about the different things. And they said, he was just over this moon. He said, I don't know what happened with our dad. He said, but he just couldn't stop talking last night. A week later, the phone rang to Tom, and it was one of the lads. And he said, everyone, is it all right? What's the matter? And he said, you'll never guess, he said, my dad died last night. Just 1 week before his passing, with a sudden heart attack. He'd gone to the circle and found out about life after death. Now, the thing was, that man, as a young man, had been one of the Pilgrim Brethren, who believe when you're dead, you're dead. That's it, there's nothing. He had to know, so that he knew where to go 1 week later, 1 week after he sat. Just his wonderful stories like that makes this work so important. Now, Transfiguration, I mean, I know some of you will have seen it. Some of it's better than others. Some of it's very, very clear. Sometimes you can see, I mean, the first time I saw that, I couldn't believe it, because I was sitting at right angles alongside the medium and looking at the side of it. So I could see the mask. I could see this face look towards me. And it was the face of a clown in all his makeup. But what happened was that his face, as he turned back, I could still see that the face was there, but the eyes of the medium were closed. His eyes were open. When they looked at me, they were open. And I could see in the mask that they were still open, but her eyes were closed. And that was my friend's, Clarence, my friend's guide, a companion. He pops in every now and again, and sometimes he goes off and to learn more, to keep up with the progress. He says he's not going to be left behind, so he won't turn up for some months or even a year or two, as he's busy perfecting something else that he's busy doing. That it is, and just to be able to recognise. But I don't know how many of you have seen Transfiguration not on the face, but I suppose it isn't. But one friend sits with a low-cut T-shirt, so it's like a screen, and she's one of her guides that works with her. is her aunt, who was a nun in Belgium and wore one of these big white collars. And she said it's like having a cinema screen. And they've been working at trying to get the faces against this part of the neck. And it was very effective. And I've seen a few. Some were, as they've practiced, that some are not, but one was extremely recognisable. And he acknowledged, in actual fact, that we had got his name right. And it was rather strange, because it was one of the sitters said something about, oh, I keep thinking about that chap in that American program. Is it NCSIS? I don't know. I can't remember it now. But she said, that guy. And the other one said, well, that's strange, because I'm sitting here and all I've got in my head is the Dam Busters March. And a thumb went up from the medium. And as we looked, we saw this face. And it was Guy Gibson, the bomber pilot. There was absolutely no doubt about it. And they said, yes. They brought somebody back through who none of us knew, but we were able to work out and to recognise and to find a photograph that all of us said, yeah, absolutely, that's him. Some say, well, why do they keep bringing celebrities? Well, if they do, one, the celebrities like to have a go, but also it means that the sitters can say, yes, we can see that. And they know that spirit then know that they have achieved something. Because everybody has been able to see the same thing. If it's just Grandad that comes, maybe only one person in the whole room will know. But if somebody who everybody knows, like somebody say with a distinctive face like Frankie Howard or John Lennon, some of the musicians, different people would come through and show themselves, then all of you can say, absolutely, yes, I know. Spirit then know that they have been successful in what they're trying to do. It isn't just, they're not just giving us evidence. They're busy experimenting as well. In the early days, we sat with a family in West Yorkshire. The mother and daughter are both good mediums, and the mother particularly is a good physical medium. But when we sat with them, the only space that we had, we all sat round a dining table. That dining table was 5 feet long, and it weighed 70 pounds. Yes, because we balanced it on the bathrooms on the scales, because it used to dance quite amazing. It even danced the can, rocking from side to side. The photographs taken from where I would sit at this end of it, and then there's the mother and daughter and the father of the family sitting there, and we put a chalk line down the middle of the table so that all the bells and everything were absolutely in a dead straight line. And this is a reconstruction. Now that the only one who were taking this photograph of how we sat, because after a year they said games are over and we don't want to sit with this with a big table anymore. We need space to walk about. So we said, well, we ought to take some photographs of how we used to sit so that we've got some evidence, some memories. So we set the bells in a straight line down the table, as it always was, the spoon and a rattle. While we were taking the photograph, the table started to vibrate and shake and start to dance in full electric light, with us just sitting around, no hands on the table. Well, we did put our hands on at one stage, and that's when it started to vibrate. We took our hands off and it continued, and the bells skittered out of the line, except for my little bell at this end, this one, and it didn't move and slightest amount. It stayed on its little cross, but the other three all moved. sometimes when they were dancing with them, if they didn't want the bells to move, they became as one with the table, and nothing moved at all. And it would be rocking from side to side. It would spell, we spelt out, we used it, doing the alphabet, getting messages through. And those bells would still be in a straight line when we finished the evening and put the light on. Mm-hmm. To see those not move out of place on the table that's been doing all that movement for maybe an hour, it was the strangest thing. He was met by his mother. That I do know, and I suppose the rest of the circle. But I think just as the his mother, I suppose his aunt as well. But just the family and his wife, Doris, because I know he came back after 2 weeks. He passed on the 23rd of October. And on the 6th of November, he came back and said that he was with Doris. But he came, he passed on the Saturday tea time. And I immediately rang our friends Robert and Barbara in Spain, because Robert McLean, he'd been ringing me and saying, how are we doing? We're sending the healing, how are things going? So I rang to say that he'd gone. And Rob said, don't worry, he'll be back. It might not be tomorrow, but he'll be back. But he was back at the Sunday morning service in Spain. So that was quite unusual. For in 17 hours he returned, but with him were his mother and his aunt Ag, and the medium had no idea. Nobody apart from Rob and Barbara knew that Tom had passed. And he said, he said about his mother's with him, but then she said, and an Agnes has just popped in. Well, popping in, I've just popped in, was Aunt Ag's catchphrase. So it absolutely confirmed it.
What has Spirit said? Why do they not like sittings with physical mediums videoed? I know there are hardly any videos of physical mediumship sittings. What has Spirit said the reason is they don't want them filmed?
We understand that the actual action of a lens absorbs light, it disturbs the energies, and until they are really certain, it took them several months for Tom's to be able to take the first photographs in dim red light, until they were really prepared and ready and settled. And then when they wanted to do an infrared one, they had to wait a year until Spirit were absolutely convinced that the medium wouldn't be harmed and the spirit person wouldn't be, if there was a spirit. But in actual fact, they didn't get the ones of the spirit people. It was just the ectoplasm. But the main thing was the protection, because a lens absorbs energy, but the interaction with the film itself, that causes a big disruption. And they have got to work all that out. I know they're working towards it. The infrared is like putting them in the microwave. It can burn them very, 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 very quickly. And in fact, although they took a year, Spirit still said that Minnie would feel as though she'd been kicked in the stomach when she came back. And so didn't say anything to her. And he said after she'd take the photograph, I think it was the one of the ectoplasm, he said he just suddenly started having her a cup of tea, and she was sitting there rubbing her stomach. And they said, "What's the matter, ma'am?" She says, "Oh, I just feel as though somebody's kicked me." And he says, "Yes," they said that would happen, but you'll be all right. So this is one of the problems. It's the safety of the medium. It's the unknown quantity of them until they're scientists have sort of worked things out. And until we find something. So a lot of people say, well, we'll use these, we'll use infrared, we'll use this, we'll use night vision. And they're getting now where they say they think they might, but it's up to spirit to say when they're ready. And of course, the thing is that a lot of mediums were harmed in the past. Heaven only knows how much damage was done to people like Jack Webber with the photos that were taken in those days. Alec Harris, there are no photos. When I asked Bradley about that, he said, we never got around to it. That's Alec's son. We were always too busy sitting, too busy doing our life, working and everything, but we never got around to taking any photos. So that's why there are no photos of materializations, only some lovely drawings that Alec did of his guides, which we were able to put on the back cover of the book. So, yeah, but that's the way. It's up to spirit. When they think that they're ready, they'll be able to do it.
Thank you. No one had ever told me before. I'd always wondered, but thank you.
Some of the other wonderful pieces that they can do, as I say, are things like apports, things being brought into the room and left. And so many of them are just odd bits and pieces, but others will have a very, very definite one. And one I wanted to share with you was a sitting that we had out in Spain with a medium who came to Spain for just a very short time. And she asked us to have a circle with her. And we did for just about a year. But one on the Christmas time, we were sitting, and her little guide was singing, and she wanted us to sing Christmas carols. So we were singing something like Good King Wenceslas and singing one or two others. And suddenly Tom felt something hit his toes. Now, he always sat took his shoes off. So he's sitting there with just in stocking feet. And he suddenly felt something hard hit his foot. And she said something about, well, when you sing carols, you get things. And so, like carol singers going round and singing for money and raising money and things. So he said, nothing more was said. And he said, but it's from your little girl. Now, Tom's granddaughter died when she was 10 in South Africa, only a year after they'd gone out to South Africa. And she was the only child of his eldest son, Susan. When we put the lights on at the end, on the floor, and you can see it's a tiny, tiny, tiny coin. Mm-hmm. And it is from Malaysia. And it's a 10 sen coin. Now, Susan was 10 when she passed. It was the anniversary of her passing. And the date on the coin is 1981. And that was the year that she passed. And the medium we sat with said that when they get coins, very often the dates on them are significant. And little circles going on, but not as many, possibly because of the way our lives have changed. I mean, now we've got the television. We've got the cinemas. We've got things to do. We've got there before. Very often they were at home because did nothing else to do. There was no other place to go, or they didn't have the money to go out and do it. So they stayed at home. And I think that there was an attitude that just that bonding together of a family or even just friends. This is what happened with Tom's mum and dad. And Doris, Tom's wife. While Tom was away in the army, all through the war, he was in the army for the full 7 years. And so his wife and mother and father used to go around to their friends Sydney and Gladys on a Saturday night. Sid and Gladys had a little shop. And when they would go around, and Sydney would play his violin, Gladys would play the piano, they'd have a sing-song, they'd have a good chat, probably a cup of tea and maybe a sandwich, and just have a lovely social evening. And so when Tom came back in 1946, they continued and did the same thing. They didn't go out to the cinemas. They didn't go trotting, because money was extremely short for them anyway. They worked very, very hard. Tom's dad, having been through the First World War, only had a job as a railway wagon driver at the railway yards. So not earning a lot of money, they couldn't afford to go out and do a lot of things. And so they said they just had a social evening. And I think those were the 6.5 years that led to the immediate takeoff of all the wonderful phenomena they had. But it was, yes, people just did. They went round to friends and had a social evening in. And I think it's that our lives have changed so much, and the energies have changed as well. I don't think we're anywhere near as strong physically as they used to be. Yes, well, when Tom passed, as I said, he came back within 17 hours, and then again the following week, and immediately he started to go and share with other people, make himself known. One was the London taxi driver, Michael Bagan, who Sue Farrow knew very well, and he'd given us a sitting 6 months before, so he'd only met Tom once, but admired his book so much. And he was woken one morning by Tom's face being right in front of him as he opened his eyes. He said, and then the next thing he knew, he pushed a beaker of tea at him. And they followed that beaker of tea by a silver tankard. And he said, I couldn't work out what was happening. He said, and then he kept drawing attention to his tie. And he had on a black tie, which was straight and narrow and cropped short. And he said, it's not the sort of tie that Tom would wear, but he kept insisting on showing him that. And as for his story, that same day, when Michael immediately rang Sue and told her all this, and it was the day that Sue was going to come to meet me to drive back to Spain with me after Tom had died, and he rang then excitedly when Sue arrived at my stepdaughter's house and said, Sue, you'll never guess what, I've got the tie. Another London taxi driver had a package left in the back of his cab. Didn't know who it could belong to, but inside it was a tie. And knowing that Michael wore a tie to go and church services, he thought it might like it. So he rang him and said, come and meet me. And there was the self-same tie as Tom had shown him, narrow, short and cropped. Absolutely, just amazing. The mug of tea, Tom couldn't carry with his Parkinson's, he couldn't carry a full mug of tea. So he used to wake me in the morning with half a cup. And then he'd go back to the kitchen and bring the other half in an insulated silver beaker. That was the silver tankard. These are just amazing. Well, he kept on like this, doing amazing connections, all sorts of crazy things to different people. He'd give messages through mediums in churches to somebody he knew that I knew nothing about, that it was something to do with them. And as it went on and built up, and he did different ones, and then he came back at Stuart's, communicated for the first time, very, very pertinent things he'd said. I said to my friend, I think there's a book in this. He's just doing so much. She got a message from him. She saw him one afternoon, and he said, Harrison Connections. Harrison Connections. So she emailed me and said, Anne, I think Tom's given me the title for your book, Harrison Connections. Well, I emailed her back and said, Harrison Communications, that's a wonderful title. And he immediately, because she's very clairaudient, said, No, not communications, connections. So that's how it came to be called, Harrison Connections. The home circles, yes, they can start that way, and very easily there's, you know, that you work together. And well, in Tom's mum's home circle, when she was a child, they used to sit just all and would meditate and quiet and thing, and then probably practice. And 5 of the 10 children became trance mediums. And Tom's mum was the youngest of that family, and that's how they started, just sitting there. And several of them, I mean, as well as Aunt Ag, his Aunt Mary, and they both used to do the churches as well, and his mum, and were working mediums. His Uncle Jack was a brilliant trance medium, and Tom remembers hearing him when he was about 3 years old, with this booming voice coming from his uncle as he crept downstairs to have a look at it. So it is important. When you're wanting to sit, say, for the physical, then you don't necessarily, well, Stuart has said in his book that Michael was the one, his brother was the one that thought he might be the medium, but they just sit and see what happens. Having read, you know, about John Sloan and Arthur Finley's On the Edge of the Etheric, that's what set them going. And it was just like the long time, but they are good, and they're great to be with. But it is that constant there. It's keeping the constant mix. You don't want lots of people changing over and coming and going. You need to keep that harmony so that the spirit know what energy that they're working with, and they can work it. So, and if you're going to make a decent cake, so with a Victoria sponge or something, you've got your flour, butter, eggs, sugar in exactly the same amount, you know you're going to get a good cake. If you start messing about and putting, I'll put a bit more butter in this week, or I'll put some cinnamon in, or I'll put some orange in, and start messing about, adding bits, taking bits away, it's not going to work. It's that constant mix, the good mix that spirit can then, because it takes them a long time to work out, I think, what they can do with us. And I was going down to the Banyan retreat at Easter to do the talks down there, and I'd got Tom's at the hold all out of the loft with the red light and the trumpet and the bells and the other bits and pieces all packed, and it stays packed. And I got it down, brought it down into the office, and I thought, now I must check and make sure that the little bells are inside the trumpet. And check my folders. And as I was doing that, I picked the trumpet up, and it rattled. There was something strange. Well, the bells are wrapped in packages. It sounds as though there's something in there. Unzipped because it has its own little velvet carrying case, and I unpicked it, opened it up, and out fell a bobbin of pink cotton, sewing cotton. Now, I love sewing, and my reels of cotton live in the wardrobe in my bedroom. Never has the trumpet or the bag of things been in that room. It was certainly not in there when I did the talk in November down at the Banyan, and it hadn't been out since until end of March, and I was going to get it out, and it had only been in that hold all in the loft, and then brought down into the office until I was ready to open it. So yes, we've had coins as well over the times. Different places found a 50p piece in the cup of a thermos flask, which was stored in a storage cupboard in the guest room. That was some years ago. But at the same time, the family that we sat with in West Yorkshire, they had the same thing happen, in that a 50p piece was found in the top of the thermos flask. So just that there was, Tom found the name when I can't seem to get the screen thing right. When he came to write his first little book, Visits by Our Friends from the Other Side, he called it after their name because the Saturday Night Club was the name of their circle, because it was held on a Saturday night. And so he had to invent a name to get an ISBN number. And so in 1989, that's what he called it, Saturday Night Press. When we came to write his book that I showed you earlier, Life After Death, Living Proof, we realized that he had actually been allocated 10 ISBN numbers, but only used one. So we wrote to the Nielsen's, the people who have all the numbers, and they said, yes, here's the rest of your numbers. And so we continued to call it the Saturday Night Press. When we finally made the DVD, at that stage it was a VHS video, we added on, as well as press, publications, because we were having more than just the books. We've got that, and we've got the CD of the Christmas party. But because we couldn't get any publishers, we tried 14 mainstream publishers that did mediums and spiritual and healing, those sort of books. They wouldn't look at it, absolutely. Nothing to do. No, thank you. No, we've got plenty of authors. No, we can't take anything for 18 months. No, we don't think it's suitable for us. So we didn't know what to do. And then, out of the blue, Lisa Butler wrote and asked if she could use one of Tom's photos from the little book in a publication for one of the American, North American Spiritualist Churches, or Association of Churches or something, but she was doing it for their magazine. And emails started to exchange, and we found out that they suggested they couldn't find a publisher, and so went to a company called Lightning Source, a print-on-demand, do-it-yourself. It turns out that Lightning Source is part of Ingram's, the biggest book catalogue company, I think, in the world. And so our books go worldwide. And so we've now, I started, and with the help and the encouragement of David Fontana, who gave me a book, an academic book to do for a colleague of his. And then he's found out about the Alec Harris book. And it snowballed. People said, Anne, do you think you could get this book back into print? They're asking £50 on the internet. And do you think you could possibly do so-and-so? And that's how it's gone on. So we've got redone the one on Helen Duncan, written by her daughter and Kay Hunter. And Alec Harris one was first put out as They Walked Among Us, by Boris Barbanel did it at Psychic Press, and only did 1/3 of the whole manuscript. But when David went to see Bradley and found out about it, it turned out that somebody else who'd sat in the circle years before had spent 2 years converting it from typewritten sheets onto the computer. And so it was ready for us to do it. And that was like a total gift. We could met up with Bradley and persuaded him to part with photos or lend us photos that we could use in it. And so I've got this beautiful book, and the family are thrilled with it. And this is just, it's snowballed. There are now, I was adding up to date, there are 29 books in print. Now, if it's larger for you, it's a simple address. It's www.snppbooks.com. And with that one, and then, as I say, it's got all the separate bits. We've got the history of the Saturday night clubs of that. The blog is very, very much out of date, but there's some good articles about us sitting with David Thompson and with Kai Muga, and I think Scott as well on there from a few years ago, to where we had Tom materialise at David's. And I haven't been, because I've been so busy with all sorts of doing the books at times, that I don't keep up with the blog at all. But on the shop one, if you click on the little tag that says shop, it then comes up with books, CDs or DVD. Now the CDs, unfortunately, were the ones that go with the Stuart Alexander books, her books about Stuart Alexander, the experiences of trance. we can't, because of the particular printers, we weren't able to do the CDs with them, and so they have to be ordered from me through the website. And to Australia, it just means that we ask people to write in first, because we've got to obviously charge more postage than is quoted on the website. But we do quite a lot of ones from different people all over the place.
Thank you, Anne. It was wonderful, very enlightening and interesting. We look forward to having you back again. So we'd like to hear some more from you. And we want to keep you involved in what we're doing in AREI. So we'll be keeping in touch with you. Thank you, everyone else, for coming and for being with us this evening. It's been a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all very much as well.